Lonzo Ball is back on the basketball court. What does that mean for the Bulls? Can he actually make a career resurgence? We're going to talk about Bam Adebayo. Is he overrated, underrated, or properly rated? Plus, we're going to talk about some of the most intriguing teams headed into the month of September with training camp right around the corner. All that and more on today's Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On NBA, your daily source for all things NBA from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us and making this part of your day, being with us here Monday through Friday with all of our great shows with our different hosts. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. My name is Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network and co-host of Locked On Nuggets. If my voice happens to crap out during this episode, just please know I caught COVID and then I caught pneumonia from COVID, as my friends have started calling it the coronamonia. So I'm trying to power through this episode. I'm not 100%, but I'm close enough to be able to do a show. Couldn't miss another week with my guy, my co-host, David Ramil. You can catch him on Locked On Heat. David, how you doing? How's your offseason going?
It's a lot better than yours so far, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
you know what? We're managing to kind of work our way through this NBA offseason. Not a lot of news happening, but still plenty to talk about around the NBA.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some of those topics today. We're going to get into our most intriguing teams heading into the month of September. Some of them are just teams that, have a lot of potential this season. Some of them are going to be teams with outstanding questions in terms of big extensions on the table. We're also talking about Bam Adebayo because David runs Locked On Heat. I want to get his thoughts on Bam. I've been having some conversations with colleagues about how good is Bam, how much can you focus on Bam, where does Bam need to be in like a hierarchy of a team. And so I really kind of want to dive into Bam Adebayo because I think he's a fascinating kind of figure in where the NBA is at right now. But we start today with some news. Lonzo Ball is actually back with the Bulls on the court after so many weeks and months and quite honestly, years of the reports being that he couldn't run. Ball was recently cleared to start full contact scrimmages via Joe Cowley of the Chicago Sun-Times and has started that process on schedule with no setbacks. The veteran point guard has been participating in scrimmages in Los Angeles. The next step for Ball will be to run with his Bulls teammates at the team's practice facility, which will allow Chicago's medical staff to evaluate him and devise a plan for him headed into the preseason. So this is a pretty significant development. And the reason I say that is the Bulls let go of DeMar DeRozan. They trade him away and go ahead and let him walk. They have obviously kind of shifted to a youth movement. They trade Alex Caruso. And the assumption has kind of been like, yeah, okay, Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic are still on the roster because they're still trying to find somebody to take those guys. But like the shift is going to be like all the young guys, Kobe White, Ayo Dosunmu, Patrick Williams, who they kept on a big money contract, play the young guys, and then probably gun for Cooper Flag. I think Lonzo Ball is so good that if he's able to actually play, he can shift that. I don't know what he's going to look like on the floor. Let's start here, David. When you read this report, are you like, hey, maybe this could actually happen? Or are you like, I'm going to have to see it until I really believe that Lonzo can play again?
I'm in the latter camp because missing 2 years at the NBA level because of recurring injury and setback after setback, you just don't see a lot of players come back, much less be impactful players after that long an absence. And look, to his credit, he's kept working. He stayed out of the news. He stayed out of trouble, and he's only 26. And so there's a lot of things going for him in terms of being able to stay focused and commit to being a full-time basketball player again. And at the same time, I don't know how realistic that is. And so when you hear, oh, he's been working out, he's ramping up, etc., that's fine. I'd like to see it actually manifest onto a court. I'm happy as hell for him because that is just such a tough place for an NBA player to be in your prime as a young player and to have your career. I mean, many of us thought that his career was dead in the water. Like the fact that he was under contract, nobody thought he was ever going to play again. And while maybe he kind of personally felt that he could, or at least internally believed that a comeback was always possible, we don't see that a lot in NBA history. And to miss that kind of significant amount of time and then still be able to make a return, I have to wait to see what kind of player he'll be. And so, I mean, you're saying that he could shift things for Chicago, but I mean, the acquisition of Josh Giddey, I imagine Giddey would start over Ball. Even I don't know. Again, the framework is so difficult to have this conversation because what are we talking about? Like a ball at like 50%, Ball at 70%.
Right.
If Ball is at 100%, wouldn't you have to start Giddey anyway, or would you find a way to start Giddey alongside Ball? I don't know how that would work out for Chicago.
Not only that, but you got Kobe White. Like, you're right on this list, and it's like, okay, Kobe White, Kobe White, Zach LaVine, Josh Giddey, Lonzo Ball. Now that's a really That's like a really talented 4-guard set. Ayo Dosunmu is your 5th guy, but there's not room for him, and so they're hoping obviously to move Zach LaVine as soon as possible. But if they don't find a spot, I don't know that you can just send LaVine home. You're only going to lose value there, right? You can't. The only way, if you can't get a deal for LaVine done before training camp, you have to play LaVine in order to be able to be like, hey guys, remember he's still actually like a good basketball player, and some team suffers an injury and takes the bait. But yeah, it's a good point that they've really kind of invested in Josh Giddey, and so what do they do there? How do they kind of balance that? And again, they seem committed to Ayo Dosunmu alongside Kobe White. Is like Kobe White's supposed to be like the franchise leader now. And so it gets really messy here. Now, if Ball comes back and is actually viable, I think he's probably a guy that if everybody's like, okay, can we get the medicals? Okay. One of the problems, even if he's good and the Bulls are like, we need to trade him because we're trying to tank, what you'd never want to do as a front office is you don't want to agree to a trade for a guy and then he fails the physical and then he has to come back and both sides are stuck. That's an ugly situation. And so having to navigate that is like another thing here where it can really complicate things. Ironically, I feel like the Bulls are in a spot where they have too many good players for what their franchise is kind of where they're at. Like if everybody's healthy and able to play, that 5-guard unit, those are all pretty good players. Those are all pretty good to really good players. Yeah. And I think that can cause complications when you're trying to, because if you want to get into the, odds are flat for top 4. If you want to get in top 4, it's going to take less than 25 wins. Like you're just going to, you cannot be picking up random wins in November that will cost you later. The competition is going to be so fierce for Flag, Bailey, etc., that it's going to be pretty tough. So I'm just very curious to see how this shakes out with Chicago.
Yeah, they just seem like a team that would, you said 25 teams, they would win just 26. Like somehow they would find a way to win that 26 game that would keep them out of that, because that's who they've been for years, right? They've never been good enough. They've never been bad enough. They've always kind of just tread water, regardless of injury. Then you've got the mini DeRozan resurgence and everything else like that. You lose players due to injury, and somehow you still manage to kind of, just trudge along there and figure it out, and just again not achieve much, but be too good to be bad and be too bad to be good. And it's a tough spot to be in because you want to be, there's teams that are going to be legitimately bad. I think just that are actively have traded whatever talent they might have or lost them in free agency, et cetera. And I don't think the Bulls are quite there. So again, they're going to be a middling team, a terrible team to watch, but they'll probably win more games than they'd like.
Up next, Bam Adebayo is like a really interesting figure coming off of the gold medal with Team USA. There was a social media post that got a lot of attention based off of a supposed 2K reaction. 2K denies that it's the actual rating for him defensively. I want to ask David, who's obviously an expert on the subject, being co-host of Locked On Heat, is Bam Adebayo underrated, overrated, or properly rated in the NBA right now? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On NBA. Game Time's got a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. It's the best way for you to get into concerts, sports, comedy, theater, anything. You're going to find it with Game Time Picks. They've got this all-in pricing option. If you toggle that on, it means you're going to catch all the fees. You're going to know exactly how much, what it says. It will give you exactly how much you actually have to pay. I hate when I'm like, oh, I can afford that. And then I go to checkout and it's like, no, actually it's 30% more than that with fees and everything else. I get really mad at that. Game Time takes that away with the all-in option. They've got the lowest price guarantee. Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you can find a lower price. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. We'll be right back on Locked On NBA. Back here on Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us, making this part of your day. Matt Moore alongside David Ramil. So, David, Bam Adebayo, he's a guy.
He is.
He's popped up in a bunch of different conversations this offseason, right? He was really good with Team USA, especially playing next to Anthony Davis. He took a big leap last year in terms of his 3-point percentage, and that was like a significant kind of move for him. He was a bigger part of the offense last year, in part by design, in part because Jimmy Butler missed quite a few games. There was a post that came out, a social media post that had him ranked abysmally low on defense based off of his lateral quickness, steals, and block rate. 2K has said that is not accurate, or at least they've said that has not been released. They didn't deny that was the actual rating, just that they haven't established the ratings, I think is the way that they put it. I think the question of where Bam Adebayo fits in the NBA hierarchy is really complicated. I think Bam is, pound for pound, the best defender in the NBA, because I've seen him battle Nikola Jokic and do really well on him. He can switch on to any guard. He can switch on to any forward. He's precise. He's disciplined. He knows how to contest things. He's never going to have the box score stats, and that's a big reason why he hasn't won DPOY, is he doesn't rack up blocks, he doesn't rack up steals, and he's not going to be a dominant rebounder. In part because if you're switching a lot, you're not going to be near enough to the basket in order to be able to grab those boards. It's a lot easier if you're Rudy Gobert and you're just like retreating 4 steps, contest shot, turn around and grab it. I'm not saying that what Rudy does is easy, but it's easier to grab rebounds and collect those box score stats. At the same time, Bam is like this really good passer, but he's not the focal point of the offense, to where it's like he's not Nikola Jokic. He's not Domantas Sabonis. He's a capable and versatile scorer, I think, at 3 levels, but he's not elite enough. Like, he's not Kevin Durant. He's not like an elite level scorer. He's not Joel Embiid, even, with like the killer mid-range pick and pop action. He's just really good kind of across the board in a lot of areas. He's elite in some, but those are areas that are kind of harder to quantify and get attention for. So my question for you is this. Let's start here. Is Bam Adebayo underrated, overrated, or properly related in general, broad NBA circles?
I would have to say properly rated, which is probably a little surprising, because there are parts of his game that I think are underrated, specifically his defense. And you pointed that out, how he doesn't rack up the kind of stats that buoy that argument sufficiently. Conversely, I think people kind of see him as a glorified role player, and I don't think he's that either. So while some people might underrate him and some people might question if he's overrated, I have to find a way to strike that balance. So I think he's a really good player that impacts winning at a high level, makes smart plays, and plays defense at an elite level. And I agree with you that I think he is also the best defender in the NBA. And maybe it's simply just the fact that I watch him as often as I do and see him erase possessions to such a high degree. And I think that's the thing that kind of tilts the argument in his favor. Not only does he do a tremendous job of guarding perimeter bound players, but at the same time, there are possessions that just wind up culminating into nothing. He just erases them because, I tweeted this out during the Olympic play. Like, again, you're facing guards internationally that might not be aware of what it's like to face a guy like Bam Adebayo. You call for a switch. You see this guy who's 6'9", big body, you can blow up right past him. And then, despite what 2K says, he somehow finds a way to shift his feet and move right with you, and he just blocks you off at every opportunity. So what do? You kind of panic and you go, well, gee, I can't get past this guy. Can't shoot over him because he's much taller than I am. So I have to find a way to, dish the ball off to somebody else, play a game of hot potato as the shot clock winds down. That's something that Bam won't get credit for, nobody will remember it, and it just kind of gets buried, and it happens a number of times per game because of Miami's switch-heavy defense. So I think there are lots of aspects of the games that need to get better, particularly offensively. But when it comes to defensively, I think he's underrated. And as such, I guess you'd have to find that balance of him being somewhat properly rated then.
So like a really interesting comparison here is, for me at least, is Draymond Green. Is that Draymond's like a really interesting comp here. Now, I think Draymond's defensive peak is higher than Bam's. Like, I think Draymond at his best was a better defensive player than Bam. That's how good Draymond was. But I think Bam's best in the NBA today, but I think Draymond's peak was higher. I kind of pull up the stats. I want to look at I looked at 2015 to 2019. So the championship window for the Warriors from their first title through their finals loss to the Raptors. And then I looked at Bam's 2020, which is when they first made the bubble and they first made the finals through last season. I kind of looked at that comparison, and it's interesting because like Bam averages 7 more points. He actually rebounds more on average over that span than Draymond did. That was surprising to me. 9.8 boards to 8.1. Draymond's got him an assist, which you would expect because of the Warriors' offense in part. And Bam's got him in field goal percentage and free throw percentage and effective field goal percentage. Draymond was actually a better 3-point shooter because Bam hasn't really shot until last year. But Bam, I think, has the ability to kind of take that leap. And Draymond was a little bit older than Bam has been in the stretch. So there's still kind of this window up there. The advanced stuff, the Vorps and Schmorps are actually pretty comparable for Bam, with a slight edge, as you would expect, toward Draymond Green playing next to these kind of guys. And that, to me, I think is kind of like a really good, interesting comp there, where it's like, look, if you had Steph Curry with Bam Adebayo and Bam was able to play short roll and just make plays for others or finish at the rim, if you had somebody that made it easy for Bam Adebayo, because one of the problems I think with the Heat is Bam's job is to make everything easy. Like, he's the only guy that makes things easy for everybody else. And that, to me, is like a big reason why he never looks as dominant as he is, because he's having to be both the focal point and the connector. And you can't be both. And I don't think he's necessarily suited to be the primary guy. I think he's great as that connector, and with the right personnel around him would be even better.
Right. No, I agree with all those points. It's exactly right. Spot on. Which is why they've been linked to Donovan Mitchell in trade talks. They've been linked to Damian Lillard. They've been linked to Kevin Durant, and on and on and on. They've been trying to upgrade to get that one player that can lighten the offensive load so that Bam could fit that role more effectively. To have Jimmy kind of shift into the second option on offense with, whoever, insert name here, taking over and being the engine, the focal point on offense, and then the kind of allowing, Bam to shift down. And look, you make good points there, because I mean, Bam is versatile. He can make plays. He can do a lot offensively, but it's also, you're asking him to do so much in the defensive end. You're asking him to do so much offensively. And I don't think scoring and being that kind of offensive fulcrum is his strong suit. I don't think that's what he was meant for. I think that's just not the nature of who he is as a person, as a player. It's just never really been that kind of guy. So it's it's an interesting question how you kind of look at guys like that. If you shift the personnel, you could say this with a lot of players around the NBA, but I think right now they're trying to make Bam the second option for Miami. I think Jimmy Butler would probably prefer that he'd be the first option. I think Jimmy would probably, at this point, especially in the regular season, he would kind of hope that Bam and Tyler Hero would take over the offensive load a little bit more, allowing him to kind of save himself a little bit more for the postseason, and hope that maybe he still has some juice left to kind of close things out and maybe help Miami win another title, however unlikely that might be. But I don't see Bam ever making that leap. I thought it would be possible. Like in the early season, in the early weeks of the off season, I thought there might be the possibility that the Heat would explore trading Jimmy Butler, because, as you know and you reported, there's some issues there with the contract and everything else, and it just didn't resolve that way. But I thought if the Heat were to eventually trade Jimmy at some point, and they make that shift to just say, Bam, here's the keys, this is your team now, lead us, then I wonder how we'd see Bam make that evolution, if he's even capable of it. Because I think there's another level for him And at the same time, I just don't know how comfortable he is accepting that responsibility.
You need such high level offensive players in terms of shooting around him. Which again comes back to the nasty question of Tyler Hero, but that's a question for another day. You mentioned Jimmy Butler, who's going into a lame duck year in terms of his contract, expiring contract season with no extension, an agreement from both sides to go ahead and let this ride out. That's an interesting situation. And there's a number of guys that are now going into camp with looming extensions that have not been signed yet. Makes it pretty interesting. We're going to talk about our most intriguing teams going into the month of September and training camp. Up next here on Locked On NBA. You've heard us talk about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. We'll be right back on Locked On NBA. Back here on Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us, making us part of your day. Matt Moore alongside David Ramil. Hit us in the comments with do you think Bam Adebayo can be the best player, second best player, or third best player on a championship team? Or do you think he can't be in any of those, which would be rude? Let's talk about some intriguing teams heading into the month of September, David. And these could be teams that we're kind of interested in, that we just kind of think have a lot of potential, that the vibes could be really good going into the scrimmages that the teams will have, and then training camp at the end of the month. I'll start with the New Orleans Pelicans. So this roster just feels incomplete to me. I am very close to being like all in on the Pels again. I can't wait to get hurt again by trusting in them. But if they just move Brandon Ingram, everything makes sense to me with this roster, but he doesn't currently. And he's still on roster, and there is an extension that he is eligible for that he has not signed. It is really confusing to me watching the Pelicans try and manage this. I think they're in a spot where they value him so much, they want high return, and everyone around the league is kind of like, yeah, I don't know if I really want to pay Brandon Ingram all the money in the world. That doesn't sound like an awesome opportunity. There's been talks about the idea, at least, of with Walker Kessler in Utah being kind of on the outs, which again is kind of confusing. With Utah being in the middle, kind of stuck in the middle, just having extended Lauri Markkanen. Like, okay, they can't really tank because they got Lauri. They go for Brandon Ingram. The Pels obviously need a center. They don't have one. They, to me, are the most intriguing team. I'm really interested to see what the Pelicans do throughout the month of September, not only with Ingram, but also I think with the possibility of a CJ McCollum trade as well.
Ooh, I mean, that's heavy. I didn't realize that there was this much hanging on going into the season, but that's not a good place to be. Like, I think everybody's going to do their best to try and remain professional and everything else like that. But you go into media day and the high hopes and the expectations, especially for a team that's as good as they are and seems like they have the potential to win as many games as they do. You want to be kind of free, clear, easy, going to media day, kind of breezing through it, knowing that you have a good chance of being a contending team, although that might be a little bit overly optimistic. But again, you don't want the idea of a contract or a potential trade kind of hanging over there. You want your roster to be as complete as it's going to be. And so for all the potential that the Pelicans have, you wonder whether or not these kinds of things are going to provide, I don't know, a major distraction of some kind. Is Ingram fully healthy and available? What's his role next year? Is he going to be playing at the same level he was prior to last year? Like, I don't know. There's a lot there, but I also am just curious, like, not just the market. Like, I know the issue is that he wants to get paid, and he wants to get paid a lot of money. Are there teams that are even capable of paying him the kind of money he seems or is reportedly seeking? Because I know that there isn't much out there after this offseason, and we kind of saw how a lot of players that went into free agency thinking they were going to get a big payday were severely disappointed. And I wonder if Ingram might be next on that list. He's just not good enough to be the kind of superstar that you have to clear salary cap space for. And that being the case, like, what teams that are out there kind of say, oh yeah, we could use a pretty good player in Brandon Ingram, then we're going to pay him really good player money.
It's usually a team that's kind of stuck in the middle, right? That's like or they have an outstanding situation they have to resolve. One One of them I would probably look at as well is the Orlando Magic, where I don't love the idea of Ingram next to Paolo and Franz Wagner. Like, I don't, that makes me a little bit like, I don't know. And then you're like Jalen Suggs and KCP. There's not really room for him. But look, they do have WCJ and they do need scoring impact. And so if you're like, well, we need to move to WCJ because we just gave Goga all this money and we gave Jonathan Isaac all this money, and WCJ's are odd man out. You use that package alongside whatever else to go ahead and grab Ingram, and then you figure it out. You figure out a way to manage those kind of combinations. And that's probably kind of the situation that you have to be looking at. Or it's a team like the Jazz, which are just like, yeah, no, we're too good to finish with 15 wins and be in the top 4. And we're not good enough to make the playoffs. And if we have Brandon Ingram and Lauri Markkanen, we're going to have a heck of an offense. Now, defensively, I think they'd be a disaster, but that I think is kind of the component here. They were in talks. I heard from multiple people said this to me, that the Cavaliers, the Kings, and the Pelicans had talked a lot about like a 3-way deal before the Kings made the DeMar DeRozan trade. And there was actually some discussion after of like, hey, they could still maybe do that deal. I don't think it's likely. I think the Kings are pretty much like, no, we're good. Like, let's roll with what we got and go from there. But I do think that's kind of like, that's one of the things that's happened is because the Pelicans have not been able to find those answers, they've found themselves in those kind of jams. Is there a team that you look at and you're really interested to see what the month of September looks like for them?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. One of the teams that I think is flown under the radar pretty dramatically this offseason, it's the Milwaukee Bucks. I know they don't have a lot in terms of like whatever issues they may be facing. They're not, they're a team that kind of everybody just, has been passed, right? The Knicks made their big splash this offseason. And of course the Sixers did as well. Celtics coming off that title run. But the Bucks championship window hasn't closed by any stretch. And right. You've got now an offseason of Dame Lillard putting in the work, understanding his role in that team, playing alongside there. And while their entire future, or at least the short-term future for this team, kind of hinges on Chris Middleton's health, I still think that they're a pretty good team that's capable. I mean, I would put them as a contending team. They might not be at the same level as, say, the Celtics, but I think they deserve some credit of being, viewed as maybe the 3rd best team in the Eastern Conference with a capacity to advance all the way to the NBA Finals, because we've seen Giannis, we've seen what he can do, we've seen how good he can be, and he's very much in his prime. And so I think that's a team under Doc Rivers that maybe has learned something over the course of his coaching career and understands how to get the most out of this team, that I think is poised to have a really big season.
Yeah, I mean, I just think Giannis is pretty under the radar in general. Yeah. He was still so awesome last season. For me, a lot of it is I've had a hard time because the expectations are still really high. They have to be with that roster. Doc is a good coach and he's way better than Adrian. Like last year, everything fell apart because of Griffin. Like their record was good, but the whole thing was just kind of a disaster. And that really submarined them. And then when Doc came on board, everyone that kind of watched them was like, oh, they look better, but then they were just losing games. And so it was like they would fix problems, but they wouldn't be able to put it together. And they were in the middle of the season with injuries and everything else. And so trying to figure out like how to combine those things, I think is difficult. Where I still kind of get stuck with them is, do I think Doc can coach them to 50 wins? Sure, absolutely. Like this roster is good enough for them to get to 50 wins. Do I like some of the additions that they've made? Absolutely. I think DeLon Wright was like a really great pickup for them. Think them moving on from like Beasley was really smart, but Mid and Lopez are still up there in age, and I'm really worried about their versatility. There's a reason why there's so much trade talk around Lopez this summer, is I think that they're kind of the awareness of like, we got to get younger here. And I'm not sure what that looks like. And if you're not set, if you're not just like, yeah, we know who we got, we're going for it, I get worried. And it still seems like they're like, well, we still probably need to figure some stuff out. That causes uncertainty. And I still think it's fair to be like, to look at the situation with Dame and recognize like, hey, Dame still didn't want to be here. Like he wanted to be in Miami. He's fine with it. He's like, he had his moments last year. He had things that he did really well and struggled in some other areas. But to me, it's like a very complicated question with Milwaukee, where I'm like, yeah, no, it could be great. They could win the title. Also, this could just completely fall apart because of age and injury. They were so old, and that's, I think, a huge problem for them. Another one that I've got is the Denver Nuggets, who obviously I cover over on Locked On Nuggets. Jamal Murray, no extension yet. The talk was like, oh, after the Olympics, they'll get it done. Murray's back in Denver. He's doing scrimmages with the young kiddos, and yet there's no extension. And the longer that goes, there'll be more questions. Now, by the time you hear this, that extension could have been announced. That's entirely possible. Knock on wood. But you have that. You have Christian Brown moving into the starting unit. You have the continued tension between the front office and Michael Malone over young guys having to play versus not. You have Russell Westbrook entering the equation, which I'm just going to be very interested to see like what happens when Russ gets in and is working with the young guys and is doing like setting the tone like Russ does, how the team responds to that. It can be great. They need somebody who's more of a barker. They needed somebody loud. They needed somebody who's actually going to get in people's faces. This has been a quiet team forever. But all of this is going to happen in the entire month of September. And like Nikola Jokic isn't going to be in town until media day, if he's there at media day. Like, and last year, I think he arrived that morning, and I expect that the same this time. Is like, I expect his plane to arrive in Denver the morning of media day. And so there's just like a lot of questions here about like, how is this going to go? They've got to find a way to come together very quickly, and they don't get to do it in a training camp where they go somewhere. Usually they go to San Diego and they hole up there. They can't do that. They have to do it in Denver with more media, being at home, more distractions because you're at home, not as close knit, because they're going overseas to Abu Dhabi for the Abu Dhabi games versus the Celtics. So there's like a lot of question marks I have about how this is going to look for the Denver Nuggets going forward.
Fascinating. I had how much of that, like the perception around that team, because I always thought, and obviously you have a much better perspective covering the team, but like how much of that was kind of glossed over the last couple of seasons of not just Joker's greatness in general, but the fact that they won a championship, kind of to hide all the behind the scenes blemishes, because it seems like there's been a lot of tension kind of brewing there for a while now, and they were so good and they just capitalized on the right season. They got quote unquote lucky on top of being really damn good. And that was enough to kind of just say, you know what, we won a title. And yet, like the way you make them sound, they sound like they're a lottery-bound team. Like despite the fact that they've got arguably the best player on the planet on their roster and a really good roster surrounding him. And there are all these questions, and it looks like kind of similar. And maybe you have a different perspective again covering the team, but you describe the capacity, the capability of what the Bucks could do and what they can reach, and yet how quickly it can all fall apart. It kind of seems like the Nuggets are at the same level, like where they can win a lot of games and be really good because Jokic is just that damn good and Michael Malone's that good. And at the same time, it can really all hit the fan very quickly. And next thing you know, they could be, if not a bad team, because I just don't think they're capable of being that bad a team.
Right.
I just not winning the kind of games to help cover up all these blemishes that are going to be pretty apparent if they don't.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've still gone for 50 wins just because I've kind of just been like,
that's a baseline for them, right?
Yeah,
like they're not going to win less than 50 games.
You know, they lost Bruce Brown last year. We're exhausted. And Jamal Murray missed a bunch of time, and they won 57 games, tied a franchise record.
Right.
And so that's kind of the problem here is, you know, and you mentioned kind of like the behind the scenes turmoil. It's just very common in NBA circles. Like this is a dramatic, messy league, with exception of a few teams like San Antonio, Miami, and a few others like Golden State. Think about how much tension there was with Draymond Green and everybody for years and years, and like how many articles we got about the Draymond problem and on this, that, and the other, and they just kept winning, you know. And like that's kind of like the way it goes is like if you've got so many competitive people in an environment, there's going to be tension. And you know, Malone wasn't Calvin Booth's hire, and I think that's always going to create a little bit of tension. They've managed to work together, and Malone's done a lot, I think, in terms of like he was around for Summer League. I think he understands the task in front of him. That's like, look, you may not like it. Like the key with Malone is that he'll do the job. He'll just make sure that, you know, he doesn't like it. That's always been like his MO is like, it's how he is with the schedule. He'll be like, no excuses about the schedule, but like, let me tell you all the ways the schedule screwed us this year. And that's like how he rolls. And so I just think it's an interesting kind of setup. Gonna be fascinating to see. We'll see how all this shakes out with the Pelicans, with the Nuggets, with the Bucks. And I'll just say this: I'm gonna be very curious. I expect Jimmy Butler to shut down all drama on the first day and just be like, "I'm here to play. We'll worry about it later. No big deal, and it'll be fine." But it's Jimmy, so there's always a chance that it doesn't go that way, and we'll see what happens. We'll have you covered here about all of it.
Haywood Highsmith better lace him up because they might be taking on Bam Adebayo and the rest of the starters afterwards. So we'll see how it goes.
And we'll have you covered for all that here on Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us. Make sure check us out all throughout the week with all our great shows. Give us a subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/LockedOnNBA. We'll see you guys again next week for our show. Tomorrow you can catch John Corrales and Jake Madison catching down the latest news. We'll talk to you guys again next time here on Locked On NBA.